To most of America, Charles Nelson Reilly was a punchline. The man in the enormous glasses and the silk ascot giggling in a little box on Match Game, firing off double meanings for an afternoon audience that adored him and never took him seriously for a single second. That was the man America thought they knew. But there was one person in all of television who saw something else entirely. A man who could book anyone alive, any movie star, any senator, any legend in the world, and who instead kept inviting back the giggling game show guy. Again, and again, and again. Nearly 100 times. More often than almost any guest in the entire history of his program. That man was Johnny Carson. So ask yourself this: why would the king of late-night television, the single most powerful tastemaker in American entertainment, keep handing his couch night after night to a man the country dismissed as comic relief? The answer is simple, and it is the whole story. Johnny Carson knew something about Charles Nelson Reilly that the audience at home never did. And the one night, Reilly finally tried to show America the truth for himself. The truth Carson had understood all along. It would, by his own account, cost him everything. This is what Carson knew. Let's start with the man America saw, because for most people that man was all there ever was. By the 1970s, Charles Nelson Reilly was one of the most familiar faces on television, and he had become familiar in exactly one way, as the funny one. He was a fixture on Match Game, trading wicked innuendo-laced banter with Brett Somers and Gene Rayburn, peering over those oversized glasses with a delight that was impossible not to love. He turned up on Hollywood squares. He even did Saturday morning children's shows. Wherever he appeared, he was the reliable laugh, the guy you couldn't quite place, but always recognized, always enjoyed. And here is the cruel part. America loved him and underestimated him in the very same breath. Because the laughter came with a ceiling. To the public, he wasn't a great actor who happened to do game shows. He was a game show personality, full stop. A character, a giggle in a pair of glasses. In an industry that quietly looked down on game shows, that label was a kind of sentence. And once it was stamped on you, it didn't come off. Reilly understood exactly what was happening to him. He said more than once that game shows had made it impossible for him to be taken seriously for anything else. That the moment the country filed you under game show, the file simply never reopened. He even predicted, with the dark, knowing humor of a man watching his own fate unfold, that when he died, the headline would read just 3 words: game show fixture. He wasn't wrong. That is more or less exactly how the world would come to remember him. The clown had become a cage. But across town, in the most coveted chair in all of television, one man kept quietly opening the door. Here is the first thing Johnny Carson knew that America had either forgotten or never learned at all. Long before those glasses became a punchline, Charles Nelson Reilly was Broadway royalty. He hadn't even meant to be a comedian. As a boy, he had entertained himself with little improvised puppet shows. As a young man, he dreamed of being an opera singer and studied voice seriously until he came to terms with the hard truth that the voice simply wasn't there. So he turned to the stage instead. And on the stage, he was magnificent. In 1962, he won the Tony Award, Broadway's highest honor, for his performance as the scheming, weaselly Bud Frump in How to Succeed in Business. Without really trying one of the few musicals ever to win the Pulitzer Prize. By then, he had already made his mark in the original cast of Bye Bye Birdie. He would go on to originate a role in the original cast of Hello, Dolly, earning a second Tony nomination. For a stretch in the early 1960s, Charles Nelson Reilly stood at the very center of the American theater during its golden age. And he didn't stop at performing. Reilly became a deeply respected director. He staged the legendary actress Julie Harris in her one-woman portrait of Emily Dickinson, the Belle of Amherst. He directed James Earl Jones in the two-man drama Paul Robeson. And decades into his career, he earned yet another Tony nomination, this time as a director. But the second thing Carson understood went far deeper than resumes and awards. It went to the very center of who Charles Nelson Reilly was, and to the weight he carried every single day of his life. On the afternoon of July 6, 1944, a 13-year-old boy sat in the stands of a circus in Hartford, Connecticut. Above him, the enormous canvas big top of the Ringling Brothers Circus caught fire. Within minutes, it became one of the deadliest fire disasters in American history. Around 167 people lost their lives that day, many of them children, trapped in the panic and the crush at the exits. The boy in the stands was Charles Nelson Reilly. He survived only because his older sister, who was there with him, lowered him down over the side of the bleachers, away from the deadly bottleneck below, where so many others were caught. He lived, but the fire never let him go. For the rest of his life, a life spent entirely inside theaters. As an actor, a director, a teacher, Charles Nelson Reilly could not bring himself to sit in an audience. The crowds, the enclosed space, the long rows of seats with the exits far away, all of it brought back the thing he had barely survived as a child. Sit with the cruelty of that for a moment. Here was a man who gave his whole existence to the stage, and who could never simply sit and watch a show from the seats the way everyone else in the world could. And the fire wasn't the only shadow over his beginning. When Reilly was young, his father suffered a severe mental breakdown and was eventually institutionalized. So this is the truth underneath the laughter. The funniest man in the room was very quietly carrying some of the heaviest things in it. And Carson, who sat across from him on that couch nearly 100 times, knew the man behind the laugh. America only ever got to hear the laugh. There was one more truth Johnny Carson understood about Charles Nelson Reilly. And in its own way, it may have been the bravest thing of all. Early in his career, a network executive looked at this gifted theatrical young man and told him flatly that there was simply no place for him on television. The words Reilly always remembered were blunt and ugly, that they didn't let queers on television. It was meant to be the end of him. Instead, it became the very thing he would spend his entire life disproving. Because Charles Nelson Reilly did not hide. In an era when being openly gay could erase a career overnight, when almost everyone in his position wore a careful mask, in public, Reilly walked onto America's screens as unmistakably defiantly himself. He never apologized for who he was. He took it and he turned it into his art, his timing, his whole electric, joyful presence. In his own flamboyant way, he was decades ahead of his time. And away from the cameras, he shared his life quietly and devotedly with one partner, Patrick Hughes, for some 27 years. What that took to be that visible, that honest, that early, after being told to your face that there was no room for you, is almost impossible to overstate. It was a daily act of courage, dressed up as a giggle. And Johnny Carson, who could so easily have let a man like that quietly fade away, did the opposite. He gave him the couch. He gave him the audience. He gave him his blessing over and over and over again. America saw the camp and laughed. Carson saw the courage. That in the end is the whole difference between knowing someone and merely watching them. To understand what that final night cost him, you first have to understand what The Tonight Show actually meant to Charles Nelson Reilly. Think about the strangeness of the pairing. Johnny Carson was famously almost painfully private. A man who could charm 40 million strangers a night and still remain a mystery to nearly everyone who truly knew him. He didn't come on to plug a project and trade pleasantries. He came on to spin a tale leaning in eyes wide behind those enormous glasses, building toward a punchline that often bent the truth a little for the sake of a bigger laugh. And Carson adored him for it. The stories could be about anything, a catastrophe from some long-ago play, a backstage feud, a beloved fellow performer he treated like family. He spoke of Joan Rivers, another of Carson's most frequent guests, with open tenderness, calling her "my Joni." On that couch, he was exactly the warm, generous, larger-than-life figure his friends always swore he was the one the rest of the country only ever got in 2-minute pieces. It was the one place that treated the so-called game show fixture as what he truly was, one of the most charming, quick, fully alive people in the entire business. In a strange way, it was the only place that gave him back to himself. On Match Game, he was a square and a grid. In the public's mind, he was a label. But on Carson's couch for a few minutes at a time, he was simply Charles, funny, fearless, and genuinely seen by the one man whose attention meant everything in show business. The people who knew him best later said it plainly: he loved Johnny Carson. And the affection ran both ways. Years afterward, when filmmakers went looking for old clips of him, Carson's own company answered without a moment's hesitation. "We love Charles," they said. "Anything we can do to help." Which is exactly what makes the way it all ended so hard to forget. He treasured those nights so much that in the retelling, the number of them kept quietly growing, 103, 105, until even the people making his life story had to gently settle on a figure. The truest count was somewhere right around 100. But for a man like Reilly, the exact number was never really the point of a good story. And then came the last one, on what would turn out to be his final appearance, Charles Nelson. Reilly did something he had almost never done on that stage. He didn't tell a funny story. He didn't reach for the laugh. He performed. He stood and delivered Hamlet's great soliloquy, "To be or not to be," serious Shakespeare from the Tony-winning artist that America had never once allowed him to be. For one moment on the biggest platform he had, he tried to show the whole country the very thing Johnny Carson had always known. And by his own account, that was the end of it. He was never invited back. He never heard from Carson again. He called it with the dark, easy shrug of a man who had survived far worse, the late-night death penalty. Now we should hold the why of that loosely. Reilly was a storyteller to his bones, and he cheerfully admitted that his stories tended to grow a little in the telling. But here is the part that is painfully, undeniably real. The tape of that final performance is gone. In one of the great acts of carelessness in television history, the network erased years of Tonight Show archives to save money. The recording of Charles Nelson Reilly, finally standing as a serious artist on national television, no longer exists. Even the proof was erased. The clown is what survived. Near the end of his life, Charles Nelson Reilly did the only thing left to do. He sat down and told his own story, a one-man show later filmed, and in it, he finally gave America everything: the fire, the father, the Tony, the courage, the long, quiet cost of being filed away forever as a giggle in a pair of glasses. He died in 2007, and his old dark prophecy came true after all. The world remembered the glasses. The world remembered the laugh. Game show fixture, exactly as he had feared. But for nearly 100 nights on the most famous couch in America, one man had seen the whole person, the Broadway giant, the survivor of the fire, the master teacher, the artist who refused to hide who he was. Johnny Carson knew precisely who Charles Nelson Reilly was, and maybe that is the real tragedy. Not that America believed he was a clown, but that he was so very much more than that. And we only ever let ourselves laugh. If this story stayed with you, you'll find more of them, right here. The real lives behind the faces that once filled America's living rooms, and the truths they never quite got the chance to tell. Subscribe, and we'll keep telling them. Share project content. Quien Celo and one created by you. Add PDFs, documents, or other text to reference in this project. Content